So we're starting this new series, Firestarter, and not to use a pun, but I've been stoked about this series for several weeks, and have been excited about preaching this series and getting things going, and kind of jumping into this idea of focusing on what it means to be tenacious, the tenacious DNA that we're cultivating and that we're a part of in Meta Church. And really kind of, before I jump in, I want to kind of like walk you back maybe a few months, because the inspiration for this series actually came from a lot of you guys and conversations that Krista and I were having with you privately, corporately, about a lot of different things as we were pastoring and leading you guys through circumstances pertaining to relationships, circumstances pertaining to jobs and kind of next steps, situations pertaining to faith and your relationship with God. And as we were having these conversations over the course of 2-3 different months, really as far back as February, what we started to see was that there was this kind of like common thread or a common theme that I think a lot of you or most of you were experiencing or have been experiencing, maybe even for some time now, and this feeling of being like stuck or stifled, or maybe feeling like there's kind of like you're in a tunnel, but there's no light at the end of it. And so you're just kind of in this dark space and all these different dimensions. Maybe it's like, because, okay, well, I want love, I want a relationship, I'm like hopeful for something, but I don't know like when that comes or what, like when that day like will be here, if it'll ever be here. Or maybe like your job and you're trying to figure out, okay, what's the next like step that I take to like get to where I need to be, to become what I want to be, to do what I want to do. Or even in faith, maybe most importantly or critically in faith, where it feels like maybe God has chosen or God has selected other people and brought favor and blessing upon them, but then chosen to ignore or bypass you in order to get to them. And those feelings and those situations all kind of lead to this place where you're like, all right, like where am I? Like what am I doing here? Like what happens? How do I like? I don't feel like I can move forward. I don't want to move backwards, but I don't really know like what to do. Like there's some sort of obstacle or barrier that's been placed in the way. And what Krista and I realized was that not only was this a common theme, but we realized that this is actually a very real tactic from the enemy. That the enemy is seeking in every way possible to do what he can to block or to prevent you from being able to move forward. To kind of prohibit you from stepping into whatever is next. And not even just to prohibit you from stepping into what's next, but to keep you from seeing a possibility of what's next. And this enemy we talk about, whether you realize it or not, I think sometimes it's so easy in our kind of westernized, Americanized view of society and world and culture that we ignore the fact that we have a very real enemy at work against us. An enemy who's described by Jesus as one that seeks to steal, kill, and destroy. Not one who just seizes to kind of like, okay, well, I'll just ignore them or I'll mess with them a little bit and sprinkle a little bit of problems. But one whose sole intent, whose sole purpose is to steal your joy, is to kill the work that God is doing, and to destroy any sort of hope or ambition that you might have for a better or greater future. And this enemy is not just like kind of using everything or anything. He's super savvy and he's super smart, and he knows exactly what he needs to do to keep you feeling stifled, to keep you feeling blocked, or to keep you feeling kind of imprisoned or captive to the circumstance that you may find yourself in. And the thing that I realize about this is that just because we have a real threat or just because there's a real attack doesn't mean we have to hold back, doesn't mean we have to shrink back, and doesn't mean we have to step back. In fact, we should be able to move forward. We should be able to step forward. We should be able to kind of press ahead. And the fact of the matter is that when we feel threatened, when we feel attacked, when we feel stifled, when we feel stuck, the truth of the matter is that we can actually get stronger and stronger and move forward and ahead regardless of what the enemy is opposing or putting before us. In fact, it's often that our own worst enemy is not the enemy, but ourselves. Because we end up getting discouraged, because we end up getting kind of stuck in this kind of like, almost paralyzed state where we're not willing to move forward. But the truth is we can grow in boldness and we can grow in tenacity and become the type of people that God always intended for us to be in the first place. Which kind of brings me to the scripture. I love what Paul wrote to the church at Rome about Abraham. And he says this, he says, even when there was no reason for hope, Abraham kept hoping, believing that he would become the father of many nations, for God had said to him, that's how many descendants you will have. Verse 19, and Abraham's faith, listen to this, Abraham's faith did not weaken, even though at about 100 years of age, he figured his body was as good as dead, and so was Sarah's womb. In case you forgot the story, God had promised to Abraham that I'm going to lead you to be a father of many nations, that nations will be born through your lineage, through your children. And here's Abraham at 80 plus years old, waiting on this promise, waiting for something to come. Nothing's happening. And it's not fulfilled until he turns 100, and his wife Sarah was 85. And he's waiting and waiting and waiting and holding on to something, maybe believing that God would do something. But it says of him that even though his body was as good as dead, and so was Sarah's womb, his faith did not weaken. Abraham never wavered in believing God's promise. In fact, his faith grew stronger and stronger, and in this, he brought glory to God. He was fully convinced that God is able to do whatever he promises. I mean, think about that. You talk about tenacity. Abraham was 100 years old, holding on to a promise, growing stronger and stronger with age. The longer he went without the fulfillment of his promise, the stronger he became. I mean, imagine that. He may have doubted himself. He may have doubted his body, but he didn't doubt his God. He could look at the wrinkles, he could look at the age, he could look at the physical exhaustion, he could look at his wife and see how she had aged. This beautiful woman that he had married, who was now old in age and past the point of child rearing and childbearing. Yet he said, no, my God promised me this thing. And so long as God promised it to me, I'm not going to let go of it. So long as God has said and so long as God has spoken, I will move forward. It doesn't matter what opposition. It doesn't matter what physical impediment is there. It doesn't matter what type of resistance I'm up against. This is the promise that God has spoken. And if God has promised it, God will bring it to fruition. I mean, imagine waiting for 100+ years. I mean, some of us, we give up after like 2 days of praying. We go like, if we're generous, a couple months. And we're like, where are you, God? I thought you said. I thought you promised. I thought I heard the pastor say that you had good things for me. I thought like love and marriage and all this stuff would kind of come just on its own. I thought that opportunity for advancement and for career would be like just right there waiting as soon as I graduated college, as soon as I was done with this first job, as soon as I kind of completed that internship program. I thought this would be there. And it didn't happen. And we're just ready to give up. We get discouraged. Oh, well, God must not care about me. God must be focused and busy with somebody else. Like he loves them more than he loves me. He cares more about their situation more than he cares about me. You know, we give up, we lose faith and say, well, you know, I don't know if I can trust them anymore. I mean, I've been praying for 3 days. And I said, God, if you don't deliver by Tuesday, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, we laugh, but like, it's true. Like, I remember several years ago, like, as we were praying with Gia over something, and she like was praying for something. She was praying specifically for the prayer request that she shared today for a baby brother. And she's like, how come God's not listening? It's been 5 weeks already. And I laughed, but then I thought, man, that's how I am. Like, that's how I am, God. I've been praying for something. It's been 5 weeks, God. Where are you? I mean, honestly, I don't really know if I've made it 5 weeks, but, I mean, if you round it up, it's been about 5 weeks from the first time that maybe one time I thought about it. So, God, where have you been? And then others of us, it's not that we've like given up before we start praying, but like we start to step towards something, and then all of a sudden there's like resistance and opposition, and it's like, oh, whoa, God, you didn't tell me this was going to be hard. God, you told me this is what you wanted. Why is it not easy? Why is it challenging? Why is there like something in the way? Why is it not delivered to me in a Rolls Royce or a Bentley and just kind of packaged nicely? I mean, God, come on now. I didn't know I was going to have to work for something. And so we just say, no, like if I've got to work for it, if it requires something of me, if God's not just spoon feeding it to me, then I'm going to give up on it. And even though we don't want to admit it, we know this is how it plays out in our life. So the question becomes, how do we become tenacious? How do we cultivate tenacity in our faith? And when we talk about being tenacious in the context of Meta Church, this is what we're talking about. This is the DNA that we speak to. It says we don't just have the grit to hold on, because tenacity is not just about making it to the end. Tenacity is not just about, well, maybe one day this will get better. Tenacity is not about like, okay, well, if I can just hang on this last little bit longer. So it's not just about having the grit to hold on, but we're relentless in taking ground and advancing the cause. You see, tenacity is about moving things forward. It's about taking ground. It's about advancing the cause of Jesus Christ and saying, you know what? No matter what's ahead of me, I'm going to press through. If I've got to go through it, if I've got to go under it, if I've got to go over it or around it, I'm getting to the other side of whatever it is, and that's what I'm going to do because that's what Jesus called me to do. So how do we get to that place? It's about doing what Abraham did and saying, you know what, God, I know this is what you promised, and I might be 100 years old, but man, I'm holding on, and I'm getting stronger as time goes on. So God, if you wait another day, that's great, because it's another day that I'll get stronger in my faith. How do we become that? Because the thing about that is that you have a decision to make, because you don't get tenacity apart from deciding to become tenacious. You see, I can't give you tenacity. I can't provide that for you. Tenacity is not something that God will choose to impart. It's something that God will choose to cultivate. And so tenacity within has to be made by you. It has to become a decision that you say, this is what I want. This is who I will become. This is what I'm going to work toward. Which brings me back to this series and this idea of fire starter. Because as we talked about this, what we talked about was doing a series based off of this DNA, based off of this identity or an aspect of our identity. But we didn't want to just do like a series in which has a word or a title. We wanted to kind of like paint a picture of what tenacity looks like. And so we just kind of thought okay, what in the natural world is tenacious? When we think of that word, what would kind of depict that and provide that sort of imagery, that kind of stirring imagery that's not going to be easily forgotten? And of the different things that you could think of, the thing that stood out the most is this picture of a wildfire. A raging wildfire, one that's consuming whole countrysides, one that's kind of moving forward and advancing. And if you don't know, there's all this stuff that you can kind of look up and understand and study about wildfires. But wildfires, when you look at that, there's so much tenacity in that. They consume whatever's in front of them. They overcome whatever obstacle, houses, walls, forests. It takes a whole army to stop a wildfire. In fact, if you want to get really super technical about it, wildfires advance at up to 14 miles an hour, which would be the equivalent of you running about a 4-minute mile for an hour. That's faster than anyone in this room and probably faster than anyone watching online, in case you're wondering. And it's going to last longer than you'll last. But this whole thing about tenacity is depicted in wildfire, because here's the thing about a wildfire. Just like tenacity, they don't happen on accident. In fact, you may not know this, but 85% of wildfires are started by somebody. And the overwhelming majority of wildfires are started for good purposes and with good intent. But it is the rare exception that a wildfire just happens or accidentally becomes this powerful force that you see video footage of, that you see on the news, that you hear talked about, or that you read about. The overwhelming majority of wildfires are started by someone. The question is often, who did it? Who started it? Who depicted it? Who began this thing, and who kind of led this thing into action? And when it comes to becoming tenacious, the same question is true for you. Who started it? Who's going to start, and who's going to trigger this thing? Who's going to become the fire starter? The catalyst, the trigger for moving this thing forward. Because again, it can't be done for you, and chances are it's not going to happen on accident. It's something you have to determine and something you have to decide for yourself. And our prayer throughout this series is that as we move throughout the weeks, you would begin to grasp and gain an understanding of what it means to become tenacious, and that you would then be able to unleash and unlock something that allows you to advance at a speed at which an entire army has to oppose itself to you or against you in order to stop you. That's what it means to be a fire starter. That's what it means, and that's what it's going to take to become tenacious, because this tenacity is going to be the thing that drives you forward in the face of resistance. It's going to be the thing that pushes ahead when there's opposition and resistance. It's going to be the thing that says, you know what, I might be in the dark part of a tunnel, but it doesn't mean I have to stop. Just because I can't see the light doesn't mean there isn't one. And so I'll keep moving forward. I'll keep advancing. As long as I don't settle, as long as I don't shrink back, as long as I don't like sacrifice what matters most to God, what matters most to Him, and as long as I hold on to those things, I can keep moving forward, because nothing shall oppose itself against the work that God wants to do in me. That's what tenacity is. That's what tenacity is about. And just like there's this kind of thing that's needed for every wildfire, I think there's three components that every wildfire needs. And I think these three things serve as a metaphor for what's needed in order to develop or cultivate tenacity. Every wildfire requires oxygen. Oxygen is what breathes life into something, into all living things. And so oxygen is needed to breathe life into a fire. It requires fuel. And fuel is a material that kind of becomes the source of incentive, or the source of sustenance. Whether that's trees or houses or dry grass or brush, that's what a fire needs. That's the fuel. And it becomes the source of sustenance, the source of incentive. It's what keeps it going. And then it needs heat. And heat, of course, is the quality of being hot. But the bigger the fire, the more fuel it has, the more oxygen it has, the higher the heat, the higher the intensity. And these three things, I believe, serve as kind of a metaphor of what's needed. And so what I want to share with you is kind of each one and kind of what they look like or what they mean to me. So when I think about oxygen in the context of tenacity, I think about your relationship with God. Tenacity has to start with God. And I'm not talking about like a cutesy thing. Like one time I raised my hand in church and prayed a prayer to believe in Jesus. I'm not talking about like, well, like, you know, I go to church, or maybe I'll go to a prayer meeting, or like I do my best not to like, you know, be associated with bad things. I'm not talking about like this cute Christianity. I'm talking about like a genuine, authentic, transformative relationship with God. You know, Chris and I this summer will celebrate 11 years of marriage. We got married August 5th, 2007. But you know, August 5th, 2007 wasn't the best day of my life. It wasn't even the best day of my marriage. It was a good day. Nothing bad happened other than I didn't get marble cake. But like everything else was great. But it wasn't the best day of my marriage. I mean, God forbid, if that was the best day of my marriage, you know what would happen? I wouldn't even be standing here today. Chris and I wouldn't even be together. You wouldn't be a part of this room if August 5th, 2007 was the best day of our marriage. I'd like to think it was the best day of the beginning of best days. But it wasn't the best day. You know why? Because we have a relationship. And over the course of 11 years, we fought, We've challenged one another. We've sharpened one another. We've grown in trust. We've built accountability and relationship. We've walked and talked with one another. That's what makes this marriage today better than it was on August 5th, 2007. Just because we said some pretty vows and said some pretty words and said, I do, doesn't mean that the rest was guaranteed to be great. And so just because you made a decision in church one day, just because you showed up and said, Jesus, I believe in you, please save me from hell, I want to spend eternity with you, just because you did those things doesn't mean that the relationship actually exists. That's a transaction, not a relationship. And so what I'm talking about here is a genuine relationship where you walk and talk with God, where you bring your challenges, where you put yourself before God and say, God, this is where I'm at. This is what's going on. This is the struggle I'm having. And then, instead of just leaving and dumping your baggage upon God, you say, but God, I'm ready to listen. God, I'm ready to hear what you have to say. I'm ready to respond to how you're going to move. I'm ready to do what you're going to do, Lord. That's what this relationship dynamic looks like, and that's what's necessary. Because, listen, I think part of the reason why so many Christians, why so many people live with so little tenacity is because we've cut ourselves off of the oxygen. We've made it about just kind of staying in one spot. We've made it about just kind of residing in this one place. Well, I made a decision one day. I prayed a prayer one day. I believed in this God one day. But I've not done anything to further the relationship, to take it beyond that. Yeah, I might do like the transactional things of like giving. I might do the simple things of showing up. I might, be someone who volunteers. But on my own, outside of the context of like a Sunday or a church event, I'm not doing anything to further my relationship with him. And so we've cut ourselves off from the oxygen, and it's no wonder, it shouldn't surprise us that we have zero tenacity. Jesus forewarned us of this. John 15:5. He says, yes, I am the vine, you are the branches. His last night with his disciples, this is what he's telling them. Those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit. Look at that last part. For apart from me, you can do nothing. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Jesus knew this would be the case, so it shouldn't surprise us when we think, okay, well, I don't really have a real relationship with God. Why do I feel stuck? Why do I feel stifled? Why do I feel like there's blocks in front of everything I want to do or everything I believe I'm supposed to do? Well, it's because Jesus said, apart from him, you can do nothing. So you don't have tenacity because you don't have oxygen. Because you don't have something breathing life into your actions, breathing life into your spirit, breathing life into your identity. But if you focus on your relationship with God and you cultivate your relationship with God, over time, that becomes the thing. Again, this is the problem because a lot of us say, well, I tried reading my Bible for a few days. I tried praying, but it's just kind of weird. And it's like, well, how long? A month? Probably not. A year? No way. 100 years? Never. But I'm talking about tenacity. I'm talking about digging in. Okay? So we're talking about oxygen. The next one is fuel. And fuel to me is a vision of your calling. Now, before we kind of dig into this too much, let me explain a little bit because I think when we talk about calling, we talk about it in the context of two different camps. We talk about calling in the context of like, oh, I'm like going to work for a church or I'm going to like serve like as part of a church community in some way, whether it's like, I'm not talking about like paid or unpaid. I'm just talking about like serving in a capacity with like the church as your calling, a role, a function, an opportunity, a ministry, whatever. Or we look at it in the context of like career, a job, a vocation. And so we say, okay, our calling is one of these two things. And if you're super spiritual, maybe it's both. But calling is so much bigger than that. Calling is so much bigger than like your role in the church. Why? Because you are the church. If you've heard me talk about this, you've been called out as the church. You're not called to do something for the church, you're called to be it. And so your calling is bigger than like a role or a ministry. And it's absolutely much bigger than like a job or like your relationship status. Because one day, someone is going to be closing the deal that you want to close. And one day someone else will be making the sale that you should have made or that you once made. And they'll be breaking the record that you once set. And they'll be writing a different line of code that you once loaded or improving upon that line. And you know what's going to happen when that happens? What you did will be an afterthought. Yeah, it happened. But, that was then. This is now. This is what needs to happen next. The staying power isn't going to be there. And like even in a relationship, I love my wife to death. And she loves me, and we have great love within our marriage, and we have great expectation for who we are together and what we do. But you realize, the purpose of our marriage isn't to self-satisfy our need for love or our desire for love. The purpose of us being together is to fulfill the calling that God has given to us, not just in Meta Church, but beyond that, to impact our neighborhood, our building, our city, our world, through the lives and glorifying God by saying, this is who God is, and this is what he's done in us, and this is what he wants to do for you, and this is what he wants to do through you. And so when we tap into that together, the reason we're together is for that purpose, and we get to share love as part of that. It's not just like, my calling is to just be a great mom. No, it's to raise children who you pass the torch to, who love Jesus and who go out advancing the cause of his kingdom. My calling is to be a great employee or to be a singer or writer or a financier or an educator or whatever it is. No, it's not just for that. It's so that the people who are impacted by what you do have an opportunity to see a God that they don't know yet through you. And so calling is much bigger than a ministry or a vocation or a relationship. Again, this is what Jesus said in that same passage to his disciples. He says, you didn't choose me, I chose you. Let that sink in for a moment. You didn't choose me, I chose you. Why? I appointed you to go and produce lasting fruit, so that the Father will give you whatever you ask for using my name. So the Father will give you whatever you ask for using my name. And to produce lasting fruit. You know why? A calling can't be based on a job. Why a calling can't be based on a relationship. Why a calling can't be based on a ministry. Because at the end of the day, those things on their own are hollow. And they don't last. But Jesus didn't call you to produce things that don't last. He called you to produce things that do last. One day somebody will do the ministry that you're doing now. One day somebody will do the job that you're doing now. One day somebody will be in a relationship. And your relationship, it's not to say that it doesn't matter, it doesn't last for forever. It's not to say that none of those things matter. It's to say that they don't matter apart from the calling Jesus has given to you. Because your calling is about making an impact. It's about leaving a legacy. It's about stealing significance on this planet. It's a picture of the legacy that God wants you to leave behind on this world. And so Jesus called you to that, and it becomes the fuel. When you look at it and say, okay, this is the picture I have in my mind of what God, the impact, the type of impact. And it doesn't mean you need to know, that means I'm going to be one day serving in this place, or one day I'm going to be it just means, you know what, God, if this is the picture I have now, my job, my relationships, the people in my building, the people that I'm connected to, if this is the picture that I have, how do I leverage that for the greatest impact? If you don't have this very explicit calling or sense of calling, it's going to be based on what you do see, not what you can't see. And it becomes the fuel to say, you know what, when something steps up against it, it doesn't matter. Because I know long term, this is what I'm supposed to be focused on. When a detour occurs and you have to work around what you thought, the path that you thought you were going to take, it doesn't matter, because you know what, this is the fuel. This is what's going to keep me going. This is the thing that's going to help me press through. Tenacity can't be built on those things alone, because those things alone don't serve as sufficient fuel. And the last component is heat. And heat is the pursuit of your calling. The pursuit of your calling. 2001 was my freshman year of high school. And there was a guy on our basketball team who was incredibly skilled. Super, super gifted. He was a senior at the time, and the dude was phenomenal. I mean, for me personally, the most gifted athlete I've ever been around in person. He played football as well. He had multiple scholarship offers for Division I football, as well as multiple scholarship offers for Division I basketball. And he could jump through the roof. He was a skilled shooter. He was super savvy. We played 31 games, like the varsity basketball team did that year. And in 31 games, he had 110 dunks. Which, to put it in perspective, if you're a good athlete, if you get 10, 12 dunks in a season, that would be pretty impressive. He had 110 in one season, breaking backboards in multiple games. I mean, he was 6'5", 215 pounds, but then he was super fast, had a 41-inch vertical, which is basically about right here. But a lot of people in his situation, or a lot of stories that you hear about, he didn't have the grades. So he had all these scholarship offers, but he didn't have the grades to actually enroll in those universities. So he decided that he was going to take 1 year off or go to a junior college where he could improve his grades, and he was going to accept a basketball scholarship to a premier basketball university, University of Connecticut, UConn at the time. And I don't know all the details of what happened, but he went to this junior college and things just kind of went off track. Things didn't happen right. He, just ended up kind of fizzling out and never being able to accept that scholarship. Interestingly enough, that university offered a scholarship to another student who, similar background, similar upbringing, similar challenges, similar gifting, I would say probably slightly less gifted than the person I went to high school with. That student would end up accepting the scholarship, working through his challenges to get the scholarship, become a college basketball championship as part of the University of Connecticut, and then go on to have an 11-year NBA career. The difference between those two students, one chose to pursue it, the other chose to give up on it. You can have a vision of your calling, and that can be the fuel that gives you kind of the tenacity to work through. But the moment you stop pursuing it, the moment it fizzles out. You see, your heat is the pursuit of your calling. What intensifies that vision, what accelerates that tenacity is the pursuit of what God has given to you, of the impact that God has called you to make. And so when you pursue that thing and when you're relentless at it, it creates a fierceness that says, I will not stop, I will not settle, I will not shrink back, I won't relinquish the opportunities that God has given to me, no matter how small, how big, or how challenging. That's why Paul wrote this in Philippians 3:12. 20 years after being a Christ follower, he says, I don't mean to say that I have already achieved these things or that I have already reached perfection, but I press on to possess the perfection for which Christ Jesus first possessed me. I press on. I press on to possess the thing that possessed Jesus toward me. Notice that kind of like that play on words. He says, Jesus was possessed by something, and that something was me. And so I'm going to press on to possess him. And I might be at this thing for 20 years, and I may not be everything great. I may have done some great things. I may have done some good things, but I'm not there yet. I could retire. I could rest on my laurels and say I've started churches. I've helped people grow in their spirituality. But Paul says, no. I've not arrived. I'm pressing on. I'm pushing forward. You know, we're so quick to stop short and throttle down when Jesus has only ever called us to throttle up. Oh, well, maybe I should just tone it down a bit. Maybe I should just kind of slow down or take it easy. It's not that big a deal. It's not that significant. And I'm telling you, just like that friend I went to high school with, someone will quickly take your spot. Not because they're better than you, but because they had more tenacity than you. Yeah. See, God doesn't have time to wait. God is looking for people who say, God, I'm willing to go after it, and I'm going to press toward it. And if that's not you, God says, that's okay. I don't hate you for it. I'm not going to, disown you for it, but I am going to find someone who says, God, that is me. Yeah. So Paul pressed toward it. So there you have it. these are the three components needed for tenacity. Oxygen, your relationship with God. Fuel, your vision of your calling. And heat, the pursuit of your calling. These are the three things every wildfire needs to accelerate, to grow, to overcome obstacles. These are the three things that you need to become tenacious. But one thing that I realized I forgot to mention to you, these three things in the natural world, oxygen, fuel, heat, they're called the fire triangle. And every firefighter, every scientist understands this one thing, that if we can eliminate one of these three components, we can tame, contain, and put out the fire. We don't need to get rid of all three. But if we can cut off one of these, we can stop it. If we can just eliminate 1/3 of the triangle, we just say, man, this one point is all this is the point we got to attack. We can stop this from going forward. We can stop this from taking any more ground. We can stop this and prevent this from bringing about any more damage or change to the landscape. And what's true of the natural world, I think, is true in the spiritual world as well. The enemy recognizes he only has to eliminate one of these three things. He doesn't need to get all three out of the equation. He says, no, I just need to stop one of them. Let me just convince them their relationship with God doesn't really matter. That believing in Jesus was good enough. Let me just tell them that their calling is about their job. That their calling is about a relationship, about marriage, about motherhood, about fatherhood. Let me just tell them that, no, you got your calling, just wait. Just focus on this aspect now. Focus on your career. You don't have to, don't be so adamant about pursuing that thing. Let me just eliminate one of these three dimensions, and he'll have you exactly where he wants you. Disabled and impotent. See, some of us have wondered why we don't have tenacity. And it's because we've probably allowed one of these, if not many of these, to be eliminated. And so we, spiritually, are extinguished from any sort of impact or change in the world around us. This is a stark reality. And I think it's the answer for why so many people feel stuck, feel stifled, feel kind of paralyzed or crippled even in their relationship with God or in their journey towards something meaningful or significant. But my prayer for you and my commitment, our commitment to you, is that we will do whatever we possibly can to help you become tenacious, to help light that fire, to help you become the fire starter that you could become, that God intended for you to become. And that this series would unlock and unleash something within you that's transformative in your life and in the world around you. Because this is what the author of Hebrews put it. We are not like those who turn away from God to their own destruction, for we are the faithful ones whose souls will be saved. In a different version it says, we are not like those who shrink back into our own destruction. We are the faithful ones. We are the ones who will persevere to them. We are the tenacious ones. This is who we're called to be. This is who we're called to become. And my hope and my prayer is that this would be kind of the linchpin that you need to start this journey to becoming tenacious. So with that in mind, I'll close this in prayer, and then we'll call it a wrap for the day. Father, we come to you, Lord, in full surrender and understanding of who you are and what you desire for us. God, my prayer is that this word would set an uncomfortable feeling and presence within us. One that refuses to settle, one that refuses to kind of just sweep it under the rug and say, no, that's not for me. But one that would cause us to say, God, I need to be tenacious. I need to become the person you've called me to, God. Not just someone who has the grit to hold on, but someone who takes ground and advances your cause because that's who you were. God, what possessed you should be the thing that possesses me. So God, I press toward it. Let today be the day, May 27th, 2018, the day that I chose to become tenacious. May we, for ourselves, become the fire starters you've called us to be. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.